The wind carried dust across the plains that evening, sweeping golden strands of prairie grass into the fading light. A hush had settled over the little farmhouse at the edge of town, the kind of silence that comes when decisions have already been made and no words can undo them. Inside, Evelyn sat by the wooden trunk at the foot of her bed, staring at the dresses carefully folded within. They were not dresses she had chosen, nor was this journey she was about to take one she had ever asked for. Each folded fabric felt like another weight pressing on her chest, each seam stitched with someone else's expectations. She touched the brass clasp of the trunk and wondered how something so small could lock away everything she knew of herself. Her mother moved about the room with hurried steps, tucking in ribbons, smoothing hems, pressing lavender sachets between the layers of clothing. "It's all for the best, Evelyn," she said in a voice that trembled as though she too were trying to convince herself. "This man, this Mr. Callahan, he has land, security, a name that will keep you safe. You'll want for nothing." Evelyn didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the way the sunlight bled through the window, the way the day was slipping from her fingers just as her life was. Downstairs, her father's voice boomed as he oversaw the men loading the wagon. "Handle that trunk with care. That's my daughter's future you're carrying." Evelyn flinched at the words. A future, yes, but not hers. It belonged to a stranger she'd never met, a man whose face she couldn't conjure no matter how she tried. In her mind he was a shadow, a figure without warmth, without laughter, without the freedom she craved. When the time came to leave, Evelyn stood in her plain blue dress, the trunk strapped behind the wagon, the weight of the world pressing against her shoulders. She turned once toward the little house she'd grown up in, the crooked fence, the field of sagebrush beyond. It wasn't much, but it had been hers. Now, it seemed even the sky overhead had grown too heavy to carry. The road stretched long and lonely as the wagon creaked along, pulled by tired horses that knew the path too well. Evelyn sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the horizon. She told herself she would not cry, not now, not for what could not be changed. But inside her chest, her heart raged against the silence, screaming for choice, for freedom, for a life that felt like hers. It was along that road, as the sun slipped lower and painted the world in amber light, that she first saw him, a rider in the distance, his silhouette etched against the horizon, steady as if the land itself carried him forward. He drew nearer, a man on horseback with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, the kind of presence that turned the air electric. Evelyn's father raised a hand in greeting, and the rider slowed, tipping his hat politely. "Evenin', sir," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. His eyes shifted toward Evelyn then, just briefly, but long enough to unsettle something inside her chest. "Road's long ahead. Best keep close to camp tonight. Heard rumors of storms rollin' in from the west." Her father grunted his thanks and waved the wagon forward, but the rider fell into pace beside them. Evelyn tried not to look, but curiosity tugged at her. He wasn't polished like the men her parents admired. His shirt was worn, his vest rough with dust, his jaw shadowed with the day's ride. Yet there was something in the way he carried himself, calm, assured, respectful, that made him feel more solid than anything she'd known. Night fell and a fire crackled at camp. The stranger, who introduced himself simply as Luke, tended his horse nearby before joining the circle. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words held weight, as though he measured them carefully before letting them loose. Evelyn watched him from across the fire, the flickering flames painting his face in gold and shadow. She told herself she didn't care, that he was just another traveler on the road, but her gaze betrayed her. Later, as the fire burned low and her parents dozed, Evelyn stepped away from the camp. She needed air, needed space to breathe. She walked into the open field where the stars spilled endless above her. That's where she found him, Luke, leaning against a fence post, the brim of his hat tilted back as he watched the night sky. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice soft enough not to wake the others. She shook her head. "Too much on my mind." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "You don't look like a woman on her way to happiness." The words cut deeper than she expected. She turned her face away, fighting the sting in her eyes. "It's not about happiness. It's about duty. My family. They think this is best for me. Do you?" he asked. The question startled her. No one had asked her that before, not her father, not her mother, not even herself in all her restless nights. She swallowed hard, the truth clawing at her throat. No, but what choice do I have? Luke stepped closer, not threatening, just steady, like the earth beneath her feet. There's always a choice, he said quietly. Maybe not an easy one, but yours all the same. She laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. You're not the one being sent off like livestock. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed gentle. No, but I know what it feels like to have others decide your worth before you've had the chance to prove it. He paused, then added, they may have packed your trunk for another man, but that doesn't mean your heart belongs to him. Let me. His voice caught as if he weighed the risk of his words. Let me earn your yes instead. Her breath caught. The night seemed to still, the stars holding their breath above them. She stared at him, at the sincerity carved into his face, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility, and that terrified her most of all. Morning broke cold and gray over the horizon. The campfire had burned to ashes, leaving only smoke curling into the air. Evelyn woke with a start, the heaviness of her dreams still clinging to her chest. She dreamed of hands pressing her into a life she couldn't escape, of a faceless man waiting at the altar with a ring forged like a chain. She turned her head and saw Luke saddling his horse in the distance, his movement steady, unhurried, as if he belonged to the rhythm of the land itself. For a moment, she wished she could slip onto that horse and ride away with him, vanish into the wild before anyone could stop her. But then her mother's voice called softly from the wagon, reminding her of duty, reminding her of the reality that bound her. The road into town was busier now, wagons passing, strangers nodding as they went about their lives. Evelyn sat in silence, her trunk bouncing behind her, each jolt like a reminder of the path laid before her. The town grew larger, buildings rising against the plains, the church steeple stabbing at the sky like a warning. Somewhere here was the man she was meant to marry. Somewhere here, her future waited, a cage dressed as security. It didn't take long for him to appear. Mr. Callahan was waiting on the steps of the inn, a man dressed in fine clothes that spoke of wealth and position. His hair was slicked back, his boots polished, his smile rehearsed. He stepped forward with a bow to her parents, his eyes scanning Evelyn as though she were merchandise at an auction. He took her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles, and said, "You'll make a fine wife, Miss Evelyn. My household will be proud to have you." Something inside her recoiled, though she smiled faintly to keep peace. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he might be kind, that his wealth might come with warmth. Instead, his eyes carried no softness, only ownership. She caught Luke watching from across the street, his jaw set, his hand resting on the reins of his horse. His gaze met hers for a moment, steady and unflinching, and her heart ached. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. Mr. Callahan showed her the house that would be hers, a large estate on the edge of town with marble, steps and rooms that echoed with emptiness. He spoke of staff who would wait on her, of dinners with business partners, of expectations she must fulfill. "You'll wear gowns befitting a woman of my standing," he said, glancing at her simple dress with a hint of disapproval. "You'll host gatherings, speak politely, and above all, remember that your duty is to honor my name." Evelyn nodded when she was supposed to, but each word pressed heavier on her chest. She didn't belong here, not in these cold halls, not in this man's shadow. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her heart restless, her mind drifting to the memory of a cowboy's voice saying, "Let me earn your yes instead." One afternoon, while Mr. Callahan discussed contracts with her father, Evelyn slipped outside into the garden. The roses were perfectly trimmed, their beauty forced into obedience, much like the life awaiting her. She wandered to the edge of the fence, where the land stretched wide and untamed beyond. That's where she saw him again, Luke, leaning against the post as though he'd been waiting. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her heart leapt at the sight of him. "I had to see you," he said, his voice rough with something unspoken. "I couldn't stand the thought of you trapped in there, pretending this is what you want." She shook her head, torn between fear and longing. "It's not that simple, Luke. My family, your family isn't the one who has to live this life," he interrupted gently. "You are, and I can see it in your eyes, Evelyn. This isn't what you want. You deserve better. You deserve a choice." Her breath caught, her hand tightening on the fence rail. And what choice do I have? To run? To shame my family? To throw away everything they've worked for? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You have the choice to be free, to be loved not because it was arranged, but because it was earned. I don't have land, I don't have fine clothes, but I give you the whole of myself. Isn't that worth more than a name carved into stone? Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them back. She wanted to believe him, wanted to leap across that fence and ride into the horizon, but fear rooted her in place. Before she could answer, a voice called from the house, Mr. Callahan, his tone sharp, demanding. Evelyn flinched, and when she turned back, Luke was gone, vanished into the wild as silently as he had appeared. The wedding day arrived faster than she could grasp. The church bells rang, townsfolk gathered, her parents fussed over her gown. Evelyn stood before the mirror, her reflection draped in white lace, her face pale as snow. She barely recognized herself. This wasn't a bride, it was a prisoner dressed in silk chains. As she walked down the aisle, her hands trembling, the crowd blurred into shadows. Mr. Callahan waited at the altar, his smile smug, his posture stiff. The preacher's voice echoed, "Do you, Evelyn, take this man?" Her heart thundered in her chest, her lips parting, but no words came. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, the weight of her family's expectations, the weight of the life shackling her. And then, the doors of the church swung open. Luke stepped inside. Dust clung to his boots, the sun framed him like fire, and his eyes burned with resolve. The crowd gasped, whispers rippled, but he walked forward unshaken, each step a defiance of the world around him. He stopped just short of the altar, his voice steady as he spoke not to the preacher, not to the crowd, but to her. "Evelyn," he said, his tone both plea and promise, "don't give your yes because they demand it. Give it because it's yours, and if you let me, I'll spend my life earning it." The church fell into silence, the moment stretching like eternity. Evelyn's breath caught, her heart shattering against her ribs. She looked from Callahan's cold, expectant eyes to Luke's burning, earnest gaze. In that instant, the world became clear. She wasn't livestock to be traded, nor property to be owned. She was a woman with a choice, and she was finally ready to make it. Her voice trembled, but it carried through the church like thunder. "No, I will not marry you, Mr. Callahan." Gasps filled the room, her mother's hands flying to her mouth, her father shouting in outrage, Mr. Callahan's face twisted with fury, his fists clenching at his sides. But Evelyn no longer cared. She turned toward Luke, tears streaking her cheeks, her heart soaring with freedom. She ran to him, and in that single act, she chose her own life, her own future, her own love. They fled the church together, the crowd shouting behind them. But the world outside felt wide and wild, the sun blazing brighter than she had ever seen. They mounted his horse, riding hard into the horizon, laughter and tears mingling as the wind carried them, away from the chains of expectation. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't running from something. She was running toward it, toward love, toward freedom, toward the life she'd been brave enough to claim. And beside her, Luke whispered, just loud enough for her to hear over the wind, "I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice." She smiled through her tears, knowing in her bones he meant every word.